Hey, welcome to Sessions with Sam and Friends. Looky here. It's not just AWS SAM. Today we're bringing in AWS CDK. And look who, I don't know if I can point the right. Look who I got with me. There we go. I have Matt Bonig and wait for this, Evgeny Karasik. How close did I come?
Very well.
All right. Okay. So what I want to do is I'm going to let you all introduce yourself. Matt, tell us who you are, what you do, and why your nails are black. So, just
My
do
name
who
is
you are,
Matt.
what you do.
My name is Matthew Bonig. I am the chief cloud architect for a company called Defiance Digital, based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We are an MSP and AWS partner. My job is to ensure that all of our DevOps engineers are implementing the best infrastructure and automation tools that we can, and we largely leverage the CDK for doing that. Before that, was a recovering application developer and DevOps engineer myself. I've been using the CDK for about 3 years and just been a developer for about the last 20 or so. Co-author of the CDK Book, host of the virtual CDK Day conferences, maintainer of the CDK Dev Slack channel, and just generally entrenched heavily within the CDK community. And my fingernails are not black. They're like a nice royal deep blue
Okay.
because I found out over Christmas after my niece painted my fingernails that it's the only thing in 43 years that has ever gotten me to stop biting my fingernails. So I'm doing it for a while to try to break myself of the habit, and then maybe, I don't know, I like it. I think it's a good look. I might just run with it for a while.
Do you know that when I paint my nails, it only takes me 1/5 the time? I'm just throwing that out there. Yeah. And palm reading is half off too, if I did that, but I don't. So there you go.
But
All right. So
what if
next,
you get a pedicure?
I
What if
could
you
get a
get a
pedicure.
pedicure?
They're very quick, in and out. 10 minutes. Evgeny, tell us who you are, what you do.
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Evgeny Karasik and I'm with AWS and I'm the product manager for CDK. I've joined only recently 6 months and my primary job is to listen to customers like you and basically make sure that my counterpart in development, marketing, and other organizations inside our company understand very well your problems and provide you with the solution that you will be happy with. Very short one.
Excellent. All right. So I'm thrilled to have you here. Thrilled to have you both here. And if you're watching, which there's some of you out there are watching, I'm super excited about that. Go ahead and throw in a text and tell us where you are, and give us a howdy hello. And we're gonna climb in. So I want to tell you, Matt. Actually, I'll let Matt tell you. Matt, how did you ever hear about CDK? Tell him.
So I was sitting there one day. I was doing a lot of Terraform DevOps work when I worked at Rackspace many years ago, and this guy reached out to me one day and he said, "Hey, you got to check this thing out." And it's a gentleman that I tend to trust pretty hardly with software recommendations. His name is Eric Johnson.
That's right.
So he said, "Hey, check this CDK thing out." And ironically, the first time I saw it, I actually thought I don't want a imperative language. I just want to do my Terraform on my declarative language. That was the key at the time. And I actually kind of blew it off for about 6 months. And then about summer of that year, I was on a contract job and I had a large amount of very similar but varying infrastructure. I was managing roughly 210 RDS databases for a project, and I leveraged the CDK in my first production usage to define all that infrastructure as code and do it in a very manageable way.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I remember the first time I ever saw it, thinking, man, yeah, this is gonna be slick. And calling Matt, because Matt, he was kind of humble about it, but Matt is actually the stronger developer of the two of us. Now, I think he would admit that. If you asked us who's better, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, Matt Bonig is better than Eric." But I knew that this would be something he'd be interested in. Jenny, how did you come around to start using the CDK? What brought you to it?
So actually, I was in product management for almost 10 years from now, right? And kind of, always be close to companies that are developing a tool for the developers, right? That's my passion, right? So there's a lot of things to do in enterprise software in general, but developing the tool for the developers, that's the motto that I'm kind of connected to. So I believe in that extent, CDK is sort of an exceptional invention, let's call it. Why? Because first of all, it is designed for the developers, and actually it meets the developers where they are. And secondly, it's an open source project, right? So it's an open source project. So we kind of, working closely with community, and what actually is coming out of that project is not just driven by the small amount of people that invent something locally, but this is something that our customers, the end users, the developers, basically either asking for and we listen to them, or working with us together in order to implement it. So this is how I got into the CDK product management role.
Nice. Very cool. Well, welcome. I know you've been with AWS for about half a year now, and I was telling him, hey, I'm coming up on 5 years. The fire hose hasn't gotten any smaller in any way, so let me encourage you with that. But yeah, you're doing great. You're still here. You're doing awesome. So, Matt, what are you going to be showing us today?
So today my goal is to show the basics of the CDK for anybody who may not be familiar with it, kind of give the quick overview, and then really try to highlight the reasons why the CDK is unique and the power of it that you can get.
Nice. I don't know what that is behind you. That mask is a little bit creepy, though.
You mean that one right there?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That's my Megatron mask.
Okay, that's pretty cool. All right. Well, I'm going to bring up your screen. You ready?
Okay. Yep.
All righty. Now, so Matt's going to be showing these, and then I encourage you ask questions. I will also be asking questions. I'll interrupt constantly. Ask the questions I think that need to be asked, or things I'm learning. Evgeny, hope you and Matt can take turns answering. But I encourage you, if you're watching out there, ask away. Matt, I turn it over to you.
Okay. So the CDK, for anyone who doesn't know who's watching, is actually an API that you can leverage within TypeScript and JavaScript, C#, Java, or the Go languages. And it's an API that is, and Python, thank you, yes. And also Python, if you want to use Python, I guess. And if you use this library, you import it into your code, and then you create a bunch of objects, what are called constructs. And these constructs represent a pretty arbitrary amount of CDK or AWS infrastructure. It could be as simple as a IAM role, or it could be as complex as an entire serverless-based microservice. The boundaries of what a construct can represent are usually defined as one of three levels. The first level, or an L1 construct, is just a simple one-to-one mapping with a CloudFormation resource, so an IAM role, an EC2 instance, whatever it may be. But then we go a level above that to a level 2. And a level 2 construct is still generally a one-to-one relationship with an AWS resource, but it adds in a bunch of extra functionality to make it extremely easy to work with. And L2s are what most CDK developers are working with day to day. L1s are rarely ever really used. And L2 is still going to be something like his EC2 instance, but it's also going to incorporate into that things like perhaps a security group or an IAM instance profile or helper methods for granting security group access, or all these other things that just make it significantly easier to build upon. When
so Alex in here, it's kind of, sorry to interrupt here. Alex in here threw in this, and I like this. When you write CDK code in the same language as your application code, you can start to share common code like configuration constants. That is so cool. I agree with that.
Agreed. And I'll see if I can show an example of that here in a moment, because it is one of the most powerful sides of it, is that you can really start to leverage an interaction between the two, between your code and your infrastructure. So those are the L2s, your basic one-to-ones with some extra helper functionality. And then you have your L3 constructs. An L3 construct is typically multiple L2 constructs put together. And this is things like a microservice pattern, or if you go to like cdkpatterns.com, those things would be sort of represented as L3 constructs. And L3 constructs are things that you are likely to build yourself, because they're typically very opinionated, very focused on your particular business needs in terms of reusable infrastructure. So you take these things. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll interrupt you in a minute. Sorry.
So you take these things, you take these constructs, and you use them like Lego pieces. You sit there and you tie them together and you smash them together into different shapes, into different forms, and what you end up with at the end is a CDK app. And it's the combination of these things together that really allows you to build your infrastructure as code into different pieces. Think of it if you've ever done any sort of website development and things like React components or other sort of UI framework components where you've got something that represents, maybe it's just a checkbox, or maybe it's a checkbox and a text field, or maybe it's a full-on menu sort of at the top of the screen. Same idea with the CDK. You can build these things up from varying degrees of complexity to build out your entire CDK application.
All right. Hey, quick question. We have folks asking, what IDE are you using? I thought it was Visual Studio Code, but someone says it's JetBrains.
It is. This is JetBrains WebStorm.
Okay.
Back in the
I like
day
this
when
one
I
too.
was, when I was a .NET developer and using Visual Studio every day, there was a plugin called ReSharper made by the same people, and I got hooked on it. And I've tried to go back to VS Code multiple times over the years, and there are just too many features of WebStorm and JetBrains. Yeah, JetBrains is fantastic. They got some good stuff. So let's get right
Alex
into some
won.
code.
Yeah, he got it right. I'll send you a Diet Dr. Pepper, Alex.
So let's talk about some basics here. Let's talk about a sort of very simple sort of serverless infrastructure sort of thing. So let's say I need to build a Lambda function. So I may come over here and I'm going to save myself a lot of time and trouble because first off, I'm using Projen. Projen is a project that came out of the CDK work and built by the same guy, Elad Ben Israel. And it is based on the same concept of having building blocks to form some sort of thing, these constructs. So in the AWS CDK world, constructs represent AWS infrastructure. In the Projen world, constructs represent files in a Git repository. So in the case of Projen, I can use that to manage all the files that are in my repository and things like that. So here within Projen, I've bootstrapped this application using Projen. It is a fantastic thing. I recommend it for anyone who's building CDK apps. It is a great tool and just in general for repos. But there's a really cool feature that comes with Projen when you're building apps this way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and create a new directory. This directory is going to hold let's call this a read thing directory. And I'm going to go ahead and drop in here a read thing .lambda.ts. And this is going to be a very simple Lambda handler. It's not actually going to do anything right now. It is going to simply just do nothing. All right. So it'll help if I got my syntax right. That's probably better. Yes. Okay. So what's cool is I have this thing now. Now I need to define a Lambda function within my infrastructure so that I can deploy this handler out and use it. Now, because I named this file a lambda.ts and because I am using Projen, when I run my Projen command, it's going to actually generate for me a AWS CDK function to use automatically. And this is going to save myself some time when it comes to defining out things like the proper runtime to use, where that handler is, and all these other sort of useful things that come along the way. Notice here too, let me kind of make this a little bit bigger. It's automatically added an environment variable to my Lambda function that adds in this AWS Node.js connection reuse enabled. This is an environment variable that the Node SDK will use to make HTTP calls more effective within the runtime.
Keeps connections alive.
Yep. So now if I want to go ahead and use this thing, all I have to do is create a new instance of it. So I'll call it the read thing function and I'll give it basic information, and that's it. I've got my Lambda function. That's all I had to do. I wrote the handler, I created a new instance of this thing, and I'm off and rolling. Now,
okay. Now I'm going to interrupt you here.
Yep.
When I'm building, and you're probably headed there, so maybe this is a segue or this just could be an unnecessary interruption. You can look at it either way. So when I'm building a Lambda function, and of course I come from the same world, one of the things is I tell it where the code is. And one of the struggles I had in the raw, in the L1 construct for a Lambda, you kind of have to do a zip file, right? And then there were some L2 constructs that came out that handled some of that combination and grabbing the files. How are you doing that here?
So this is all handled automatically by this L2 construct. So
Okay.
this read thing function just inherits from this function construct part of the CDK itself.
Okay.
And this part right here that says code.fromAsset, this is a function that is going to go out. It is going to bundle up that Lambda handler that I wrote and package it up into a zip file, and then the CDK deploy command line utility is going to handle getting that pushed out into an S3 bucket with all the references and everything accordingly. It's basically magic. You don't even have to think about it anymore.
Okay. And so I guess the question I have here, and yeah, we have someone pointing out there's 14 X. So yeah, I'm sure you can change that. Are these extra parameters scoping, is this done by Projen or by CDK? I'm assuming that was done by Projen.
So this generation right here was done by Projen, but
Okay, gotcha.
the basic parameters that get passed in here are standard CDK. So anytime you create a construct within the CDK, you always have to give it a scope. That scope represents effectively its parent within a big tree. So everything that you generate in the CDK is forms into a CDK tree, a hierarchy of how things are related to each other.
Okay.
And when you define a construct, you have to say, well, it belongs to this scope or this parent, and it creates that parent-child relationship. The second parameter, the ID, is just an identifier. It's completely arbitrary. 99% of the time, people actually give the construct name again as the ID, but you can name it whatever you want to. That ends up boiling down into the CloudFormation logical ID, by the way. So if you change an ID, then you're going to effectively change the logical ID, and therefore it's a drop and recreate in the CloudFormation world.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. And I know some of you are asking questions out there, and I am going to bring them up. I'm going to let Matt talk for a little while without interrupting, but I'm not missing your questions out there. Alex, I see yours, and we'll come to that.
Yep. And regarding the 14.6, I think that's just because I've got a slightly older version of the CDK in here, or a Projen that I need to get updated on there. I wouldn't worry too much. It is something you can kind of change along the way.
Super
14
old.
is now deprecated. It should be 16 or 18. So now let's go on to one of the reasons why I love the CDK. All of this is unit testable. So I don't have to worry about going and deploying it out to an environment to see if I'm going to get really what I want to. So over here on the right, I've got a snapshot test that I've written in the Jest framework, which is a very standard testing framework in Node and in TypeScript. All I'm doing is I'm creating an instance of this stack, and then I'm going to go and check to see if it matches a snapshot. Now, the very first time I run a test, that snapshot doesn't exist. It doesn't have a previous run to go off of. So it's going to go ahead and blow up on me because you should never live demo anything.
That's right. But that's what this show's all about, is live demo. I've debugged more things on this show.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, that's embarrassing. Source main.
So maybe, Eric, some comment in the meantime?
Yeah. Please throw in, yeah.
Because Matthew mentioned Stack. Stack is the deployment unit of CDK, right? So the organization of the CDK application is that you have the app, and inside the app you can define multiple stacks, and each stack can be deployed separately. We also have dependency management, simultaneous stack deployments, and so on and so forth. But everything that you're defining inside the stack as a unit is going to be deployed as a deployment unit using CDK, either CDK CLI or using CDK pipelines, which is another construct that we provide for vending CDK application and deploying them.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. And I have a question. So one thing, if you're not familiar with CDK or SAM, this is where they're both very similar. At the end of the day, they both create CloudFormation. That's what's going on under the hood, right? And so, Evgeny, when we say stack and multiple stacks, those are one-to-one with CloudFormation stacks, right? You could create nested, and I guess it's more of a question, or does it combine it to one stack?
Yeah, so a little bit inside the details, we are creating what we call the cloud assembly. So the cloud assembly is basically everything that we need to deploy your application to the cloud, and it is including all the generated CloudFormation templates per definitions that were provided in the code, but also including the assets like Matthew pointed out, for example, Lambda function assets and so on and so forth. So everything is created inside a local directory called the cdk.out, right? So if you get down into that directory and observe the files, you will figure out that all the CloudFormation generated templates are there, and also a bunch of the files that represent additional assets that your application needs.
Right. And if you need to see that, you can synthesize it too, right? Hey, I want to see it now. Yeah. Matt, looks like you got it working.
Yep. So,
What was it?
oh, I forgot to actually build my assets. So, yeah, I just forgot to step in, and I do this all the time.
We're going to stop the show here. Sorry, folks. See you later.
Total loser. So what I've got here is I've got this snapshot test. And the point behind a snapshot test is that when you run it, it compares the previous version of your code to what is now generated. And if they mismatch, if they don't match each other, then it fails as a test. Now, the first time that I ran this test, I had gotten rid of the function because it was failing. And if I take a look in here, I can actually see this is basically the CloudFormation template that is being generated. And I have this basic parameter for a bootstrap version. I've got this rules object, and that's it because my stack was empty, so there's really nothing to generate here. Now that I've added into it this read function, this L2 Lambda function construct in here, I can now rerun this test. Now, when I rerun this test, it is going to fail on me because I have now changed my my stack. I have changed what is getting rendered in here, and I can see in here that I'm now adding in this thing, and it has a dependency on this service role. And I can see that this is, if I scroll down, it's a basic Lambda function and all this other good stuff. So unit testing and these snapshot tests allow me to really quickly be able to understand what it is that I'm generating with my CDK code and compare that over time to see how things change. One of the things that's really brilliant about the CDK is that because it's using general purpose application code, I have a lot of tools to in my disposal for doing refactorings and to making things more readable or more reusable. Something that we don't get with CloudFormation. There aren't any tools out there that would let you take a CloudFormation template and take a particular resource in there and move it around or rename it easily or anything else like that. The tooling around the system is awful. One of the reasons why I love JetBrains and WebStorm is because it's got great tools for allow me to refactor. But the only way you can refactor your code successfully is by having automated testing around it to make sure that you didn't change the output. And being able to unit test it as simply as I am here with just a very easy to use snapshot test means that I can do all these refactors all I want to. I can make things more readable, more reusable all I want. And know the entire time that I'm not changing my actual output, that I'm not going to be breaking things that I wasn't expecting to break. So that's number one reason why I really gravitate towards the CDK, because it's really easy to test these things. Now, there is this difference. My test is failing, and it's failing because I added this function in, and that's something I expected to do. So I'm just going to update my snapshot and say, yes, I understand the change. I reviewed it. I looked at it. Everything looks good. I update my snapshot, and now my test passes. And until I change my code in the future, that test will just continually make sure that nothing is really changing on me. Now, this gets really fun because now we can really start doing some things that are very useful in making maintainable, readable code. So one of the comments on here, Alex said something about being able to intermix our application code and our CDK code. So let me show you what that means. Let's say this Lambda function needs to be able to write information into a DynamoDB table. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create the table. I'm going to say new table, and this is going to be a DynamoDB table here, and I'll just call this a table. Now I have to give it at least a few things. In this case, it's a partition key. I can give it the partition key, it'll be a string, and then the name I'm going to say is PK, just for partition key because I don't really care about my partition key names. Now at some point, my Lambda handler needs to know what the table name is and what the partition key name is so that it can write successfully to that table. Now, traditionally what I would do is I'd probably come in here to the Lambda function and I would pass over environment variables.
Right.
So I'll come in here and I'll say my environment, I'm going to go ahead and environment. I'm going to say table name equals my table dot name. Notice here I'm referencing my other object and I'm just pulling that table name value off of it. And the CDK is going to be smart enough to know how to reference that value even though it's not known right now. Notice when I created my table, I didn't give it a specific table name. The CDK is going to generate one for me, and I'm just saying whatever gets generated, hand it over to the Lambda function. But additionally, I need to also tell it the partition key to use, and I have this PK. Okay, so that's cool. And if I'm a good developer, I'm going to go ahead and refactor this thing and create some const called partition key name, so that if I change it once, I change it in all my places. But there's a little bit of an issue here because there's still an unexplicit contract now between my Lambda function and my infrastructure as code. And that is the actual environment variables themselves. So I have to go back over here into my Lambda function and I have to do something like process.env.table_name.
Man, you're worse than I am.
I know, right?
It's all those fingers.
I'm still getting used to this keyboard, to be honest.
Okay. Let's blame the keyboard. That
So,
makes total sense.
Always blame the keyboard.
Okay.
And then I've also got the partition key, and I've got this .env.partition key. All right. Now, if I go ahead and run this code, it's going to fail. And it's going to fail because I have a typo right here in this partition key. All right. It doesn't match up with my partition key over here. So let's fix this, and let's fix this in a completely unique CDK way. I'm going to go over here, and instead of just having these guys, I'm going to say there's an export const table name key, and I'm going to call this table name. And I'm going to go ahead and export another const called partition key name. We'll call this partition key. All right. So now I'm going to reference these keys off of my environment variables. Right? Makes sense so far? Yep. Rather than hard coding in here, I'm now making these exportable constant value variables. Now I can come over here and I can actually say this table name that I'm being set is actually going to be table name key and partition key name. And if I look, these are values that are hold on. I'm reusing variable names and I don't like that. Let's fix something real quick. Okay. So I'm actually importing the constants that are defined in my Lambda handler. I'm importing those things into my CDK code so that they can't be wrong, so that there can't be a disconnect between what my CDK infrastructure as code is saying is going to be the environment variable names and what my Lambda handler is saying the environment variable names are going to be. They have to be the same at this point.
I'm going to pause you there for a minute. I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, because that's pretty. I love that. That was super cool, but there's some complexity there, and I want to see if anybody's got questions on that. Because right there, what we saw was yes, magic of the CDK, but it's magic of the CDK being in code, and now we're taking advantage of code and all that. And that was really cool. We do have a question here. So Alex, I hope your question got answered about intermixing. It wasn't really a question, but a statement. But there, we got another. Is there any way to compose stacks and inject outputs from one service into another for stacks written using Serverless SAM and CDK both? That's not with this, but I can answer that really quick. So yeah, both services. Again, because at the end of the day, they're both CloudFormation, you can use imports and exports. So if I create something in CDK and I create an export, they want to deploy it, then it's going to be an export that's living in CloudFormation ready to be pulled. Then in SAM, if I need to grab that value, I can then take and do an import from that value. So you can cross values that way from deployed stacks. Hopefully that helps.
Yep.
Any other questions coming in? I'm just looking here to see if we have any others. If not, we're time check. We got about 10:15. So what else?
Okay.
Whatever else you want to show, go for it.
Yeah.
Evgeny, do you have anything you want to throw in? I've been talking a lot, and so is Matt, but that's expected. All right, Matt, all you, buddy.
Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show was something that I think is the long-term benefits of the CDK, which is that you can start to build out these constructs, your own constructs, that provide a lot of integrated value, meaning that I can take something that was built in another system and incorporate it easily into my CDK code. Remind me to talk about Thorsten Huger when I get done with this, because he's doing some really interesting work around this right now. So you sent me a SAM stack the other day. It had in it a workflow file in there, and I've got it loaded up right here. It's a little hard to see because this is, state machine ASL. There's a lot of stuff in here, right? But this is a comment processor. This is a state machine workflow and step functions that'll go through and try to detect the sentiment that is in a comment of a message and then handle it appropriately. So in here, I've got this ASL, and this is great. This is a vendored ASL. Someone else wrote this, and I now want to incorporate it into my CDK code because I want to make it part of some sort of service that I'm building. Someone else has already built it. Great, let me just go ahead and reuse that. Well, in this CDK, there are L2 constructs for building step functions, but there's no easy way to get it from an ASL definition that pre-exists into CDK code. So what I did was I went out and built a third-party construct called a state machine, and I am horrible at naming things, so it's just very generically called a state machine. And what I did is I built a Projen component that'll look at that ASL definition and generate out a strongly typed interface for that ASL definition and an L2 construct state machine for step functions to wrap around that. And just like I had a Lambda function construct generated here by Projen, and this is a standard part of the Projen component that I was using, I also know how I have this state machine construct that is generated for me that has this strongly typed interface. And what's really great about that is that I can come in here now, or I can go back to my code, and let's say I create a new comments processor state machine. And I call this comments processor. Now, this comments processor needs to have in it a reference. Wow, my typing is bad. Needs to have a reference to the DynamoDB table that it writes to. And that DynamoDB table is actually referenced in two places within the code. Let me go back to the definition real quick to show you. So here on, I believe it is the save comment step. So in this save comment step of the state machine, it goes ahead and writes to a DynamoDB table, and it knows which table to write to because it's provided right there in the table name parameter. But this is using some fancy-wancy work within SAM or within
those
something
are
else.
definition substitutions in SAM.
Yes, and we're not
Also
using
known
SAM,
fancy
we're using the
wancy.
CDK.
Yeah.
But that's okay, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back in here into my code, and I'm going to go ahead and provide an override. And this override is a strongly typed object generated out from the ASL. And here I now can use my IDE to help me start to replace those values out. It's not just string find and replace, it's a strongly typed replaceable observable object. So I can come in here and say, okay, the save comment, I want to go ahead and change the parameter on it. And specifically, I want to change the table name, and that's my table.table name. All right. And there's actually another one in here. So there's a save comment with translations, and that also has a parameter that is a table name. Now notice I'm getting autocomplete and IntelliSense and all that fancy stuff because again, this is all strongly typed. I have great editors and great development tools around this to make it very easy to build this out right and quick and easy the very first time. So now I have, again, providing over my table name. And there you go. Now I have this step function that you originally created as part of the SAM tools. Now I've incorporated it here within my CDK code without having to change a single line from it. I've replaced out the values that need to be done, and now I have this really, really cool thing. Now, if I want to extend this state machine or modify it, I can do that at any time that I want to. If I want to add steps to it, I can technically do that. But better yet, what I typically do is I actually go into the state machine step functions workflow editor within the UI console. I typically make changes there and do sort of all my rapid development there, and then when I'm done I re-export the ASL out here to my files, and there's nothing else I need to change unless of course I added states or things like that along the way.
Okay, that's super cool. A couple of questions. I'm going to ask the ones that are coming in first, and then I have a couple for you. And Evgeny, I'll actually throw this to you. We're getting questions of, is this going to work with Python as well, and specifically the auto completion and things like that?
So,
no, I'm throwing this one to Evgeny, Matt. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
No, Matt, please go ahead.
Okay, Matt, all you, buddy.
I was going to say I'm not a Python developer. I'm not really sure, but my understanding of is the Python typing analysis and things like that are significantly better than the last time I touched Python 5 years ago. So probably this will all work just fine.
It will, yeah. And I use Python. I am a Python developer because I can't spell Node or CDK. But yeah, I do that, and yeah, it works fine. You have the auto completion. You got to set up the right tools. But Matt had a lot of this is there's some setup that has to be done here. But once you get the tooling set up, yes, it will absolutely do that. Another question we had is it looks like your infrastructure is not closely coupled with Lambda code. And this is going back to when you were setting up your parameters. Would it be better if you extract the name constants into a shared package?
Certainly could. There's nothing stopping me from doing it. Again, this is all general purpose language at this point. The fact that what I'm writing in this code happens to be using the CDK API for this, I still get to leverage all the typical things with, pulling things out into libraries, moving files around, all that. One of the things I tell a lot of people is that the CDK does not care about your file structure at all. Could not care less in most situations about how you structure things from a file perspective. It does care how you structure things from a construct perspective. So as we create constructs and assign them to scopes and create that tree of things, that fundamentally matters to how the CDK generates code. But I can push classes into whatever files I want to. I can extract constants all that I want to. I can organize my code into any sort of file structure I want without significant problems.
All right. Perfect. I'm looking to see if we have any other questions. So I have a question for you on this, and then I want to pass it off to Evgeny. But now that you set this up, so this is let's say you want to modify that. We have another question coming in, but let's say you want to modify the ASL. As you modify the ASL, would you then just continue to use the parameterization? That's a hard word. The parameterization that I already have from SAM, and it would just continue to work because you've added these overrides? Or is it like a one-time kind of importation thing?
No, you could continue using that. You could continue modifying this all you want with SAM as
Okay.
long as you provide these overrides. Now, it's not going to do the string concatenation or the string find and replace like Serverless does. There are constructs out there that will do it. As I mentioned, there's Thorsten Huger, one of the CDK Book co-authors. Yeah. He's actually writing a whole suite of constructs right now that'll do something very similar to this, in that it'll read standard static definition files like an Open API standard or ASLs or other things and generate CDK code from that, so that I could take something like a Swagger, file that defines
Yeah,
my API
yeah.
and hand that over to Projen and or Construct, and it'll generate out all of the API definitions and API Gateway v2 or things like that for me. So really try to get us to the point where we've got this, because it's a general purpose language, there's almost no limit to what you can do as far as generating things. And that's why the CDK has been so powerful and such a big hit with a lot of people, is because there are very easy ways to build the things you need. You're not restricted by a DSL with it. You're not waiting for someone else to implement functionality. You can just go do it yourself.
Sure.
For example, I was talking to one of our engineers today. He wanted to have it so that the Git repository for the CDK was a tag on the stacks. That's fine. Go read the Git config file off the file system to get out that remote origin URL and slap that on as a tag. It'd probably be about 20 minutes worth of work. You put this into a standard library,
And then done.
you can
Yeah.
share this amongst our team very easily.
Okay. We had another question come in. Says, is there a way to add this feature in the step functions L2 construct natively out of the box to import a definition without using Projen, which is an important thing to kind of point out. A lot of the magic we're seeing here is Projen as well. So,
yes, there's a lot of Projen magic here, to be honest. Unfortunately, no. And here's why. If I go and I take a look at the interfaces that were generated by Projen, I'm taking advantage of some TypeScript specific typing language functionality here. So this omit type in TypeScript is unique to TypeScript. In fact, there's a lot of typing things that happen in TypeScript that are very unique to TypeScript and do not translate to Python or Java or C#. So this code right here is actually only usable in TypeScript. It is a limitation of this construct right now. So a lot of the functionality that I put into here, it was with that understanding that A, you'd have to have Projen, and B, you would have to be using TypeScript.
Sure.
So I don't imagine this will ever be rolled directly into the CDK project itself as an L2 construct. Now, that being said, there is the state machine construct that I have is actually cross-language compatible, but it's not strongly typed in cross-language compatible. You could use this construct on any other project you want, Python, Java, C# or anything else like that. You just don't get the type safety if you're not generating out this construct by Projen.
sorry, I'm reading the comments and I know who this
I
is.
see
I'm
it.
going to put it up.
I see it.
So what you're saying is that SAM is superior in every single way for step functions. That's funny. So Grant Lamy is a strong step functions user, has some incredible stuff out there. Sorry, now I'm just randomly clicking on things. So I appreciate that. So Evgeny, I want to kind of throw it to you for a minute and give you a moment. You got some things you said were coming, and so throw it to you, and then we'll probably have to wrap on this.
Yeah, and I might respond to a couple comments while you're doing that.
That's fine. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So really short, CDK, it's actively developed by us and by the community. So we kind of, delivering in a very high speed and velocity. Last month, we had several things that may be worth mention here because I think it will be interesting. So one important agenda for us is the performance of overall solution. As you can see, there's many moving parts in code generation and deployment itself. So we're basically focusing on performance improvement. Last month, we managed to improve CDK CLI performance at least in 90%. So your code gen synthesis step is by far much more fast than it was before, because that was one of the complaints from the customers when generating a complex application or synthesizing complex application. Another agenda that we didn't touch in this particular one because this one is dedicated CDK and SAM, but there is a native support for a containerized application in CDK. So for example, we support deployment of Docker containers as well. We added the support for Finch. Finch is an open source project that basically helps developers with a command line client for building, running, and publishing Linux containers. So you can use Finch as an alternative to Docker Desktop, for instance, which becomes due to the changes in their financial model, becomes sort of limited for the personal use unless you have a corporate account for that. Also, we are partnering with third-party ISVs. Up until now, what we presented was very AWS focused, but we see CDK and in general AWS is going towards some kind of multi-vendor, multi-ISV solution. So, for example, MongoDB is going to double down on CDK and basically deployed their entire Atlas infrastructure using CDK L1 and L2 constructs. You can find them on our construct hub, which is a public place when people that are publishing their L2 constructs to the public registries like NPM.js and others basically can share those constructs with the entire community. So go to the construct.dev. You can find a lot of constructs that are coming, reusable constructs that are coming not only from AWS, but also from other ISVs. Speaking about the content, we are adding more and more constructs to our solution. So we separated it into the specific library, CDK lib, that basically holds all the constructs that we provide for AWS infrastructure. And we do have a new construct that is coming out, which is AppSync, but every month we are delivering yet another construct that covers either another service that AWS is providing or also improving the previous ones, which were previously declared as an alpha stage and now becomes general availability. Last but not least, I saw also the comments of someone mentioned that it is currently using a runtime of Node.js 14. That's another kind of activity, a constant activity that we have. We're constantly upgrading our runtimes. Recently, we introduced support for EKS 1.24, and we are also going to introduce support for Node.js 18. So that's constantly work in progress, and every month you can see more and more updates in that regards. That's probably all. I think we are out of time. So, Matt, Eric, back to you.
Thank you. So I get this, and I know earlier, Michael, you had asked, are we going to get to SAM plus CDK? Probably not in this one, but there is some SAM support for CDK. It's not complete. I'll openly admit that. It's something we're working on. It's something that Evgeny and I are going to talk about as well. But I get the question, Eric, you're a SAM guy, and this is called Sessions with SAM. Why would you have CDK on here? Because in reality, I'm a serverless guy, and I'm an EDA guy. And so one of the things, I used to have this hashtag I use all the time, serverless for everyone. I don't care which, yes, I do. I certainly have, personal choices. Looks like we lost Matt, just you and I, Evgeny. I think Matt might have lost his internet. He might be back. We'll see. But I really don't care what you use to build it. I just encourage you to use a framework. Frameworks are so critical. CDK is super powerful. You just saw that. Matt does a great demo of that. SAM, super powerful. It does a lot, especially with the CLI that's specifically for serverless. There's Matt. He's back. But the end of the day, I just encourage you to use a framework. Terraform, serverless framework, Pulumi, CDK, something. Whatever gets you to building serverless faster, building event-driven architectures. And so, yeah, I'm a friend to any framework that's going to help you do that sooner. And so there you go. And then I will throw this out, Daraj. I'm a little mad at you for your statements earlier, but I will throw this out. One-liner for Snap Start. If you're using Java on Lambda functions, I encourage you to look at Snap Start. Enable Snap Start. It is pretty incredible. It reduces cold starts incredibly, and we don't have a lot of time to go into that, but you can hit Daraj if you want to, not hit him, but hit him up if you want to know about that. Matt, Evgeny, I really appreciate you for joining me. You're super informative as usual, Matt. You do a great job. I see we're facing a different way today, or now that you're back. So
yeah, my camera died out on me. I think battery or something like that. So
okay, well. All right, with that, I'm going to roll us out. Thank you again, both of you. Matt, any shameless plugs you want to throw out before we stop? CDK Book, if you want to, I'm going to throw it out. If you want to know more, check out the CDK Book. It's amazing.
Yeah, the CDKbook.com, MatthewBonig.com, and on Twitter at MattBonig.
There you go. All righty. Evgeny, shameless plugs at all?
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure.
All right. All right. We'll see y'all later. Thanks again. And
Thanks,
I'm
everybody.
ending it. And here's where I use